Africa at the Crossroads is an accurate description of a continent that's in the midst of dramatic change. It is also the title of the 21st Annual Diaspora Conference at Sac State, and the keynote speech tomorrow morning will be given by the former U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria and Republic of the Congo, Robin Renee Sanders, who is also currently the founder of FEEDS at Robert Morris University. And Ambassador Sanders is with us in studio today. Welcome to Insight.
Thank you so much for having me this morning.
It's lovely to have you here, and this conference has a long history here, 21 years. It's very important for the Center for African Peace and Conflict Resolution. What significance is the conference to you and what you see as the dialogue between the U.S. and Africa?
Well, I think it's a wonderful conference. Actually, part of my remarks tomorrow will be about reframing the lens on Africa, because I think that a lot of the news and a lot of the perceptions here in the United States are not always that positive about a continent that has really changed over the last 15 years or so. So it really is about reframing, providing insights on what the changes are, the positive as well as the challenges. No one's underestimating that there are challenges that remain, but there are a lot of good things going on the continent. And what I plan to talk about tomorrow is really highlighting some of those positive things, not just on the economic side, but certainly on the political side as well. So this conference is a wonderful scene setter for that.
How so in the reframing? Because I know you're also talking about the youth and the empowerment of the young generations. I think I saw that the average age in Nigeria is 19 years old for the population. So what is the reframing and the connection with the young people?
Well, I think there are two elements. One, you're right on the population. In fact, the term youth bulge is used quite often when looking at not just the population, the young population in Africa, but the young population writ large for a continent that is supposed to reach about 2.2 billion people in about 15 years. So the question is, how do we engage the youth? How do we empower the youth? And how do we employ the youth? How do we work with them to ensure that their life is a quality of life going forward, not only just in work, but also in education? There are a number of elements I think are key. One is to really find ways to encourage better basic education and secondary education, and also to provide vocational training and employment opportunities, not always traditional employment, but certainly entrepreneurial and SMEs, I think, are going to be the way forward for the youth on the continent.
How much is social media changing the picture, and how quickly?
I'm a big fan of social media. I use social media myself, and I think it really is changing the picture. I think we saw that with the Arab Spring, and I think that Sub-Saharan Africa is also using social media in its own way. I think that there are a number of examples. The Nigerian elections last year, a tremendous role for social media in monitoring the elections to ensure that the elections were free and fair and were transparent. I think you saw the role of social media in Senegal recently with their challenges with their elections, which in the end they prevailed and really had an election that was free and fair and that everyone recognized to be the way forward. So I think that social media has a role because mobile phone users it's a tremendous number of mobile phone users on the continent. The estimates right now are about 100 million cell phone users. So a lot of things are done on the cell phone that we don't even do here in the U.S. And so social media is going to have a tremendous role, not just on politics, but on economic changes as well.
And that is a documentation of history, everything that's happening with those users and with those phones. You mentioned Arab Spring, which really began in late 2010, and it has been this revolutionary wave of demonstrations and civil protests. And what's the impact been? Because it's been throughout the world, but in terms of Nigeria?
Well, I think that, I would say for the continent writ large, I think the youth in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is where my focus tends to be, really saw the changes in the Arab Spring as possible ways for changes in their country, maybe on a different definition. I hope that any change that takes place is done peacefully because I think that that's very, very important. But I think that it allowed people to see that you really can change a system that's been in place for 20, 30, 40 years. And I think if that's the message that came out of the Arab Spring, I think that's an important message.
I'm speaking with the former U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria and Republic of the Congo, Robin Renee Sanders. You can find information about her speech, which is tomorrow morning at Sac State, by going to our website, capradio.org/insight. When you were growing up, what was your life dream? You've ended up holding these high government positions, but kids usually don't start out thinking, I want to be an ambassador, when I'm in second or third grade.
I contributed everything in my life to my parents. I had the most incredible parents, and I come from a long line of public servants in the sense that to give back. I've had a lot given to me, and I've come back to full circle in trying to give back in a lot of ways. Certainly did not grow up with the idea of becoming an ambassador, but I did grow up with wanting to give back. And my parents grew up in the civil rights movement. I had, aunts and granduncles that were, barred from their jobs as teachers during the difficult years in the United States during the civil rights period. And so we were taught to really just focus on what you're passionate about. And I never looked at my job as a job. I looked at my job as things that I was passionate about. And I chose the positions that I had coming up through the diplomatic corps based on what I was passionate about. And I am still passionate about those same issues. It's really focused on education. It's focused on agriculture and food security because I think it's important for the global dynamic that we look at those issues as our population continues to grow. It's focused on economics, and economics is a broad term because it really looks at both the macro and the micro aspects of that. So when you talk about the African Youth Bulge, how are we going to address the economics for that generation going forward? So I'm really focused on that issue as well. And then it's about development because writ large, when you look at the population, we have to ensure that we're progressing forward on development so that everyone has the opportunity to have a good quality of life. So those are the issues I've always been passionate about. Those are the issues that my parents were passionate about. And I always focused on giving back. And it just happened to turn out that I was able to work my way up through a very big bureaucratic system called the State Department. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me.
Well, we're talking about a continent in terms of progress and revolution and new social media and growth, and framing it just with the kind of heart and spirit that you came at it with, which drives a lot of people to want to connect to Africa, humanitarian, a response to the need for help. And that does make me think of the other part of the population dealing with AIDS, dealing with HIV, access to care for the smaller communities. Give me a perspective on what's happening in that arena.
Well, for HIV/AIDS, I think that you can never say or do enough. It's still a very big issue. However, there is some good news there. Over the last 5 years, 5 million people have been helped by antiretroviral drugs from donors as well as from country support. So that's the good news on HIV/AIDS on the continent. But it doesn't mean that we should backtrack and that we should stop giving and we should stop putting resources behind it. It's still a big issue, and we need to throw as much resources and education behind that as possible. But there is some good news based on it is about still humanitarian, it's still about development. But of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world today, 7 of those are on the continent of Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. And I don't think that piece of information really gets out there that much. Last week I participated in 2 conferences focused on a couple of things. One, the U.S. private sector interest in Africa that's emerging because of these strong economic growth rates that I just mentioned. And the other part was really looking to have more U.S. businesses involved in foreign direct investment on the continent because right now it is a continent of emerging markets. This is the opportunity for us to be a part of that, for our markets to work together in trade and investment. It's an opportunity for us to help build small and medium-sized enterprises as well. You have about 331 million small and medium-sized businesses across the continent for a population that might be 2 billion in a couple of years. So the potential for us to have markets and consumers on the continent are tremendous, in addition to the fact that I think we have strategic interests, too, to be dynamic in our partnership, not just on the private sector, but certainly on social and development issues writ large.
I was surprised to read about an industry that I didn't know specifically in Nigeria, taking a cue from Hollywood and then Bollywood. In Nigeria, we have Nollywood.
Nollywood, exactly.
And it's been, 20 years and hundreds or maybe thousands of films. What's happening with that industry?
Well, Nollywood is just a phenomenon. It's really just fantastic. And I think that more and more Americans will start hearing about Nollywood. It's the third largest. You've got Hollywood, Bollywood, and Nollywood.
What a surprise.
And you have, it's one of the largest employers, actually, in Nigeria. And I think the potential for really sharing Nigerian culture more and sharing African culture more through Nollywood films and their stars, I think is important, and also reframing the optic and changing that lens that everything on the continent is negative. There are a lot of positive things going on, and that, of course, doesn't diminish the challenges that we've already talked about, but I think there are great examples like Nollywood that is not only an employer, but it's a mechanism to really show the culture writ large of sub-Saharan Africa and Nigeria in particular.
Well, we've talked a little bit about economics and about industry, and just getting back to the population and just looking at Nigeria, with the numbers that you said, over the last 4 years, it's quadrupled. And the huge growth that's happening centers around the youth. I heard a commencement speech that you gave last year, and it was at the school that you completed your doctorate at, which isn't that Robert Morris University?
Exactly.
And you talked to the kids about having a social contract or a social compact as they went forth in the world. So as we wrap this up, and I know youth is part of your message, expand on that a little bit.
Well, it goes back to thinking about what you want to do with your life. And as I use myself as an example, coming from a long line of public servants and giving back, I think that you have to get up every day and do something where you think you're making a contribution. And I don't think you can do that unless you're passionate about those issues. And I think it's important for people to feel that their job is part of their passion, part of their reason for being, and not look at it solely as, as a means to an end. I know that's a struggle. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I think it's important that as we become a bigger and more global and more interconnected culturally, politically, ethnically, that we have to appreciate and understand other cultures. And we have to respect them in such a way that we can all work together to ensure that we're moving forward to a more peaceful global planet. And that means working together on the feeds issues, which is my acronym for the things that I like to talk about and the things that I'm passionate about. It's really making sure that people have enough to eat, and have quality food. That's the F in feeds, and have good education. And that's one of the E's. There are 3 E's in food. And then, of course, you've got environment and energy. You've got to have a sustainable environment to go forward with our population. You've got to have energy resources and renewable energy resources in order to do that. You've got to have the economic base that I've talked about for quality education and quality life experiences. And you've got to have development. People have to be able to feel like that their life is worth something, that they have an opportunity for their family and their kids to have a better life than they've had. And I think we all have a responsibility. That's our social contract, not only with yourself, but with our responsibility as human beings on Earth.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Robin Sanders. And if you would like more information about the U.S.-Africa Conference happening at Sac State and the ambassador's speech at Sac State tomorrow morning, you will find a link on our website at capradio.org/insight. Enjoy your time here in Northern California. Have you been here before?
I have never been here before. It's beautiful, and thank you so much for having me this morning. It's been great.
I appreciate the conversation. You're listening to Insight from Capital Public Radio, and just ahead, Sound Advice with Nick Bruner.